Hello and welcome to episode 233 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, it's a special episode, Brian, when we can announce a new record for offshore wind turbine size. This one will lightly brush the moon from time to time.
Wow. Google continues to bet big on nuclear power. They say they need all that juice to power their AI data centers, which will continue to serve incorrect photos on Google searches of Clean Energy Show host James Whittingham.
That's shocking. I imagine a RoboTaxi future and make some accurate predictions you won't want to miss because, Brian, as you know, I'm always right. And if I'm wrong, well, you won't have to worry about it for long because, yes, the four-wheeled robots may kill us all one day.
Now, there was one part of the Tesla RoboTaxi event that really surprised me. I didn't expect to see Arnold Schwarzenegger there.
Where am I?
You're in a Johnny Cab.
I mean, what am I doing here?
I'm sorry. Would you please rephrase the question? Huh?
How did I get in this taxi?
The door opened. You got in. It's okay.
Right here.
Thank you for taking Johnny Cab.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the ride. The fare is 18 credits, please.
Sue me, dickhead.
We hope you enjoyed the ride.
All that and a lot more on this jam-packed edition of the Clean Energy Show. And also this week, Goldman Sachs has a very surprising battery outlook for next year. And we'll look at what some EV owners did in the recent Florida hurricanes. Brian, I mentioned that I have a segment coming up that's pre-recorded. It is about how I envision robotaxis to take place. There is a video that is now available that goes with that because I used AI to sort of make my vision come to life. And there's some AI images within that video. You can get that video for free on our Patreon page. You don't even need an account. It's a public post. I'm loving our Patreon page. It's a very neat little community we have got going there, and it's better than our website. So it's the new home of the Clean Energy Show. And you don't have to sign up if you don't want to, because there are some public posts and some paid ones as well, of course.
Yeah, so I've got an update on my rammed earth pilot project. We've been talking about this for a while. So the wall part is now complete. Our architect, John, he did it in 3 sections. He was going to maybe do 4 sections, but he ended up doing a very kind of a large one for the last section so he could get it all done.
So an L shape.
Helping him.
It was an L-shaped curve, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the last piece was a large flat part and then a little L part with a curve on it. And because it was so big, he did have somebody helping him that day. It took them quite a while to pound it out because it was quite large. Again, you've got to mix all the dirt and sand and cement and put it in the form and then, pound it out. And so, they were working kind of late that day to get that finished. But the wall part is up, looks fantastic. I love the look of it, the design of it. It really fits the design of our house pretty well, I think. It's nice and low. It's a low wall, about 3 feet high. And again, we're going to build a ramp behind it next to the house. So there's steel girders that the ramp is going to go on top of. So those are in place. So not quite finished, but we're very, very close.
Well, I'm excited to see that. And it makes me more excited for the cottage because I think that's going to be, well, it sounds like it's going to go ahead if you made it this far.
Yeah.
And the wall doesn't collapse. I think it's a green light to go for the cottage project, which would be entirely rammed earth. I love the way it looks. I love that sort of texture that they put in different layers when they put it in. That's there. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. And it's amazing that this is happening because your architect, you went to him and said, hey, I'd love to do something like this. And now he's going to conferences in Vancouver and learning about making it and building it himself with his own bare hands. And who knows where this will go? You could start a whole movement.
Yeah, let's hope.
You could be Rammed Earth Stockton, known in the history books.
But it seems difficult as a construction method to get started because there's just so many entrenched interests in construction. And, the main components of this are dirt. So, there isn't the same industry that's developed around rammed earth as the rest of the building industry.
But some of it is the footing, a concrete footing, which you would have on any structure, garage, basement, anything that's built has a concrete footing. And then there's a form that is not for concrete, not traditional concrete. It's for rammed earth that gets built. So, I mean, people can do that. This has to be better than most because it is the final display. Everything that, it is what you see. You don't grind it down necessarily or cover it up with anything. So it's all there. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of building a house that way is the interior and the exterior are instantly finished. Like you don't have to worry about painting it, putting up siding.
Just don't know how you hang pictures.
Well, yeah,
there's a way. I know because I looked it up once, but there is a way.
There's a way. But yeah, on the inside, you don't have to do drywall. You just, and it's a nice, earthy kind of tone to it. And yeah, I was worried how it would integrate into our house. We have Tyndall stone on the front of our house, which is like a limestone, a rock that has, fossils in it and stuff. It's a thing that's very common around here. And it's mostly kind of whitish, grayish. So I was a little worried how the wall would integrate, but it works great, I think, just because of the size and the shape of it. So it's nice and low. You can still see all the Tyndall stone on the house. And yeah, he did a great job. It's really coming together.
So we'll be putting all those pictures up once it gets completed. Maybe we'll make a video about it as well with the still images and you talking about it underneath. So that'll be up.
And I'll definitely, if we build the cottage, I'll definitely make a video about that. But that, that'll take years to actually, follow all the
That would be huge. That would be, our own YouTube channel just for that. I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah. So I just wanted to mention quickly our friend Lowell. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. He's got a movie called Die Alone, and it's coming out Friday in the US and I think the rest of the world. So I just wanted to give it another plug. October 18th, Friday. Die Alone with Carrie-Anne Moss and Frank Grillo. Awesome film made by our friend here in Saskatchewan. They just won the audience prize at the Stige Film Festival in Spain. This is like maybe the biggest sort of horror fantasy film festival in the world.
Right.
And they took home the audience prize. That's amazing.
Yeah, audience prizes are very coveted because, well, it also it shows it that it's a commercial film, that it's not just the critics it's pleasing, it's the audience.
People love it.
But audiences at film festivals are half critics in their blood anyway, I suppose.
But yeah, Die Alone out this Friday.
Yeah, go see it if you can. In the United States, it's not in every city, but if you live in a major center, you might have a chance to see it. You can go to their website and check if it is playing in your city. Hurricane gas shortages still exist, Brian, days after Hurricane Milton. And we've been comparing, all the FUD that's out there, the disinformation about EVs and how you certainly wouldn't want to have an EV in a hurricane. Well, the opposite, of course, is true. I checked in the morning that the hurricane was set to arrive, and I opened up my Tesla app because I have it because I can use it for charging my non-Tesla, on their network. I don't have the adapter yet, but I have it for that reason and other reasons, I guess. And they were largely available the morning of the hurricane. It wasn't set to arrive till the evening and the morning of. That's kind of when I would leave because I would want to pay as much hotel as I could if I did leave. I did watch live hurricane streamers on YouTube, the people who chase tornadoes, but they're more lucky with this one because they know where it's going to be. They were so casual and laughing and just having a great time. It makes me not want to, evacuate if I had a multi-story building or something, or if I wasn't right on the coast. But yeah, they're right on the coast looking at the storm surge and just walking around waiting in the water, or there could be crocodiles. Anyway, that's another story. That's that. But I looked at the Tesla app, and yeah, the charges were not all full. They were, of course, operating because the hurricane hadn't arrived yet. The power outages didn't happen. Mind you, the outer bands were arriving, and I suppose that could cause power outages before the wall gets there. So that is a concern. But yeah, all the Tesla stations were working. There was a couple that had a 5-minute wait time, but that was nothing compared to what gas stations were going through if they had gas. This was the situation of the gas stations the day of the hurricane.
So Gas Buddy finds that almost 1 in 4 gas stations across Florida are without fuel. That amounts to more than 1,700 gas stations. And this has been an even bigger issue in some of those areas that are bracing to get hit the hardest. So where you are in Tampa, 59% of the gas stations there don't have any fuel.
Now, if you had an electric car, Brian, you had a home or a condo that charged at home, like most people do, you would have a full range of car. You'd be packing your things instead of sitting in a gas station lineup or driving from gas station to gas station. And if you do sit in on those gas station lineups, you may be crap out of luck because, by the time you get there, they might have dried up.
Yeah. And of course, the hurricane's coming, so to charge up your car before it hits while the power is still working. That little clip, did that quote Gas Buddy? Was that the app that they were talking
from
about?
our very city. It was initiated.
Yeah.
And not a lot happens here. I mean, we make a movie occasionally that goes international. And of course, there's our podcast. But Gas Buddy is one of those weird little apps that came from here, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But I find that they're very tied to the oil and gas industry, especially their pundits that go on TV are very bullish on oil and gas. Yeah, so many gas stations, that's a lot that were out, and in that particular area there. So most of the gas stations that were out in the evacuation zones, because that's where it got hit the hardest. And we had a clip last week that the highway patrol cars were escorting tanker trucks to gas stations. But how fast can a tanker truck really go, even with a police escort? That sounds like a nightmare waiting to happen. It didn't do a whole lot, but the governor, whose name I will not mention in case I burst into flames, he was giving away free gas.
Temporary fuel depots to help ease the shortage brought on by Hurricane Milton.
And so these are free for people. We're doing 10 gallons per customer. So you go, you get it, and you could be on your way.
He says the state plans to open several more. People have been lining up for gas, but some stations have run dry. Officials are using the state's fuel stockpiles to replenish supply at gas stations. They're also providing generators for gas stations that remain without power.
Yeah. Gas stations require power to pump gas. So if they're out of power, even if they have gas, you have to get a big generator in there to operate the building. After the hurricane, there were, of course, many power outages in the Tampa area and the areas that were hit hardest. But Tesla brought a Megapack on the back of a semi-trailer. That's the pack that they would use in a grid storage system, the size of a semi-trailer, trailer, the whole full size, and it was all battery. And they hooked it into their Tesla supercharger at one location and fired it up. And it wasn't completely busy because people didn't need it, but some people did, and it was there if they needed it. The app updated to indicate what was going on there, and if you search for a charge, it would show you. See, on your app, on any app that you're using with an electric car, like a Tesla app, it'll tell you which ones, and it's up to date because those chargers are communicating with the server, unlike a gas station where you have people have to report to Gas Buddy, and it's not as reliable. So late Sunday, 30% of Florida gas stations still had no gas. And we had this update Monday, nearly half of the Tampa metro area's 1,800 gas stations were without fuel Monday afternoon. That's the last update I have on that. My point being, of course, that some things in this energy transition, Brian, will actually make life better. So here's an example. I've been reading about people with my car, the Chevrolet Bolt EV, on the Facebook groups. There's many thousands of people in that group, and some of them live in Florida. So this is what they've been doing. They've been powering their EVs, or powering their homes with their EVs. Now, what they do, this doesn't have what we call vehicle-to-home charging, like some of the pickup trucks do, where they'll actually have a big fat outlet where you can plug in your home. Then you have to have a big thing in your home, an inverter that powers your home. That costs many thousands of dollars. But what they were doing is going down to the hardware store and buying a inverter for their car that they hook up to the 12-volt battery. And that spits out, 1,000 watts or something like that. And so they run an extension cord to that, to their main things like their fridge and their lights and things like that. Fans in one case, but no AC unit because that would take too much power, of course. This guy named Joseph Ember, he posted on the Chevy Bolt forum saying, 4 days without power after the hurricane, and the Bolt still provides power for the fridge, which is 31 cubic feet, the lights, the fans, and a small electric devices. 1,000 watts pure sine inverter worked very well. Around 20% of my car got used up per day, so that means it would have lasted about 5 days. And the average gas car, I looked it up, would last about 1.5 days, less than 1.5 days idling. Because it has to turn the engine over. It's not just powering your fridge. It's just keeping the engine going, which turns the alternator, which powers the battery.
And of course, don't leave your car idling in your garage or it will kill you.
Yes, and this is one luxury. You could drive your car right into your living room. If it's an EV, it does not matter. It is not emitting anything. So another person wrote, having an EV during a major hurricane has proven to be an incredible benefit. Prior to the storm, we were able to run around town getting the essentials without worrying about finding gas. That is a beautiful thing. When the power went out, we were able to run all of our refrigerators and freezers, charge our devices, power some lights, and keep a bedroom air conditioned. I don't know how they did that, frankly. After powering the essentials for a day and a half, the Bolt is down to only 75%. So we could go over 4 days like this. We got power back a few hours ago, and we were able to get out and survey the damage. People were waiting in hour-plus lineups just for the possibility of getting some gas. Longer outages may present a problem, but considering this was a once-in-a-century storm for the Tampa Bay area, I have a great confidence in my Bolt to get us through whatever nature throws at us. As I said, the clean transition is a transition to a better world.
Yeah, well, just the idea that gas has to be physically distributed on a truck and, power outages do happen, but, electricity is sent over lines. It's a way easier system that is also data-driven. All of these points, like charging stations, they're all connected online and to the internet. And as you've said, the gas stations don't have that. So, so much of this is a better sort of data-driven solution, I guess, in the future. All right, so moving on from Power Magazine, Google continues to bet big on nuclear. They've inked a deal with Kairos Power for 500 megawatts of small modular reactors. These are molten salt reactors, and they're expected to complete this deal by 2035, with the first reactor coming online in 2030. So we've talked about this many times. Google and other computing companies need tons of power for AI. This is a thing that has really obviously exploded. I mean, just what you're using AI to do, James, needs a half of a nuclear reactor.
Yeah, I apologize for that, but I'm using AI a lot for this podcast now.
So this is a multi-plant agreement. These are smaller reactors, but they're going to build many of them. Now, the catch is that they haven't actually built one yet. And this is the thing with small modular nuclear reactors. They hoping to have the first one, sort of like a demonstration reactor, online in 2027. And so that will be the first one that this company has actually built. So a little bit of faith in there for Google in terms of, this actually working. But, they have carbon-free targets for the company. They want to be carbon-free by 2030. Now, I don't know the details of this. This is just speculation, but I imagine the agreement with Google, it's an agreement to buy power. That would allow the company to get bank financing, I assume, for the reactors. So if this somehow doesn't work or it's massively delayed, it'll be more like the bank and the company that's on the hook than Google. So I imagine Google is just, they're playing the odds. They want to have many different options. And of course, if it doesn't work or it's massively delayed, they'll just have to build more solar, wind, and batteries, which is, a thing they're already doing, but, probably not a lot of skin off their teeth to kind of add this nuclear to their plans.
Yeah, and they don't want to fall behind. They don't want to lose out to the competition on the AI race. And AI is doing a lot of things already. I can't even imagine what it's going to be doing in a few years. And they need gobs and gobs and gobs of power for it, and they want it to be clean. So this might be the boost that nuclear needs to, get a foothold. And otherwise, private companies are not funding nuclear until AI came along. I mean, they were, but they had government backup. So these recent things may be different, like the restoration of 3 Mile Island and things like that might be different where the government is not involved.
Yeah. So, there's no way to know for sure how it's going to play out. There is a very famous delayed nuclear project in the UK. This is Hinkley Point C, which we have mentioned every once in a while. This particular article is from The Guardian. So EDF is the French energy company that is a state-owned French energy company, and they're building Hinkley Point C. It's not a small one. This is a large one. This is enough to power, I forget, millions of homes.
It's
many
times the
gigawatts.
size of the one you previously mentioned, which was about half of a normal nuclear reactor.
Yeah. So, not to put too much cold water on those plans, but yeah, Hinkley Point C is one of those notoriously late projects. The original budget was 18 billion pounds when they started it in 2016, but it's, getting closer to now 50 billion pounds, which is about 65 billion US dollars. And they're looking for another $4 billion. This is EDF in order to finish the project. They're hoping that it will begin generating electricity in 2030. So still 6 years away. And they need another $4 billion to take the cost up to, $50 billion for this reactor. So, for their sake, I hope it works.
Absolutely. I hope it works. It's one of those big cost overruns because they are not building nuclear reactors anymore. There's been a long pause. There's not the workforce, the expertise, and the safety regulations have become so stringent that it becomes more and more difficult to do that.
Yeah, and the article mentions Brexit as well, that Brexit has made it more difficult to get the sort of skilled workers that they need. So, possibly that's another problem.
So France has a big nuclear fleet, and they probably aren't able to bring those people over as easily as they maybe could have before Brexit happened. Well, Brian, the biggest offshore wind turbine has now been announced, and it is blowing the other ones literally out of the water because, yes, it's offshore. Our last announced largest wind turbine, I believe, was 22 megawatts for one turbine, which is crazy because that powers a lot of things. Like one swoop would power a home for like 2.5 days. It's crazy. Yeah, and then I remember we've covered ones, they were 14 when we started the show. Then there was this big 16 announcement. It was going up by twos, it was 18, then 20. Well, now they've proved us wrong and jumped all the way to 26. Yes, 26. The largest operating one in the world is currently 18 megawatts, which just went online. But this one has jumped past that at 26. Dongfang Electric in China has produced a 26 megawatt offshore turbine, like off the line. Like it's not installed, but it's been manufactured. And companies, the reason this is happening is they're grappling with price wars due to strong competition. And if you have just one giant turbine instead of a bunch of little ones, the costs of installing a wind farm offshore are less. And plus it picks up more wind from higher altitudes.
Yeah, I mean, we keep thinking we're going to reach the limit on these things, but
yeah, I mean, there was a lot of talk that we already had because experts in these stories before said, well, that's about her. That's there. It's not going to go any larger than that. Well, it's 31% bigger than the previous record of 18 megawatts. 31% bigger. And it surpasses even the largest models announced, which is what I mentioned, up to 22. According to Bloomberg NEF data, turbine manufacturers are looking to increase the size of equipment, as I said, to reduce the cost of generating more power from fewer units. Lower prices are still needed, though, Brian, because the technology remains more expensive than fossil fuels in some parts of the world, such as coal. So, yeah, it's important that wind do that, but it's also, if you're going clean, it is an important part of the mix with solar because it does spin during the night and during cold weather in the winter. It is said that the blades were 310 meters in diameter. That means the whole sweep area is 3 football fields long, essentially. In other words, it would take me an afternoon to walk it pretty much. Separately, Chinese wind turbine manufacturer CRRC Corp said last week that it had produced the largest floating wind turbine for offshore wind, with a capacity of 20 megawatts. Now, this is really good news and surprised me because floating is usually associated with small turbines. And there's many parts of the world where the continental shelf is not high. So you can't just go off the shore by a few kilometers and drill into it and put up a turbine. You have to have it floating. Japan is an example. The west coast of North America is an example. So I didn't know they were that big. I mean, that's incredible, actually. So yeah, 20 megawatts from one turbine that floats. Now it is sometimes, I think they do of course anchor them into the sea floor, but they're not, there's no concrete foundation sitting on bedrock or anything. It's actually just drilled in and held there with cables. Very impressive. So the the separate exciting news for the places without, a high continental shelf. This is kind of a surprise, a little bonus there for it. Hey, let's dip into the mailbag now.
All right, so this comes from our Patreon page, which we were mentioning earlier. This is the new thing we launched recently. You can join and become a Patreon member and support us with a little bit of money if you like. So we have a comment on there from Timo, who says, looks great. Keep us up to date, please. This is in reference to my rammed earth wall. So he says, almost 10 years ago, my first design project in university was rammed earth. Sadly, didn't get the chance to actually build with it yet. Apparently, Timo is an architect. So, yeah, like I say, it's a weird thing about like it seems like a great way to build, but it's not exactly lighting the world on fire, taking off really quickly, and I don't know, for various reasons, there's some stumbling blocks to actually doing it this way, since the rest of the industry tends not to work this way.
Yeah, it seems to be happening in pockets, like you mentioned, Vancouver, where your architect.
Yeah.
To. Maybe Timo comes out to where we are and looks at your cottage when they build it, or after they build it. Come on out, Timo. That sounds like something that this person, Timo, would be extremely interested in, being an architect and having studied it in university or designed one in university. So yeah, it's happening. Brian is reviving the technology and keeping it going.
It's to me, it's a bit analogous to, when we make films. James and I have a film background. I always preferred like working with a smaller crew, and then you can take longer to make your movie. But the industry standard is no, you get a 40-person crew, you get a 50-person crew, and you try and shoot the film as quickly as possible. Rammed earth is more like the first way. You have a smaller crew and it takes a lot longer, but the costs hopefully end up to be similar, because it's, short with a small crew, or a regular house, you have a large crew and you build quickly.
Now, do you know how it would work if they built your cottage? Because your cottage is 2 hours away. It's in a small provincial park town or village, or even, where would people stay? Like, where would your architect stay?
Yeah, there is a couple of hotels around, so I imagine that would work. Or, camping, I guess, if you were desperate. But
how long would it take? Did you ever discuss that with them?
No, we haven't figured that out. Based on this wall, it'll take a couple of weeks, I would think, at least, maybe a little longer.
That's for the main
to do the wall.
And then you have to do electrical. Like, how does the electrical work? The electrical has to be laid within those forms. I believe
you put conduits into the rammed earth so that you can feed the cables through. So you do as much of that built into the walls as possible, I believe.
Okay, here's what I think you should do. I think you should have an electrical outlet near your toilet for a bidet, an electric bidet.
Okay.
You can buy them at Costco, Brian. I'm telling you, it's worth it. You have no idea.
Yeah.
Electric bidet with a warm seat. Yeah. I wish I had more. I've got a lot of outlets in my kitchen. I wish I had more. It's got 2 separate circuits, and yet I wish I had more. You can't have enough electricity these days for appliances. Like, I've got, air fryers and things like that. And, it's just, I'm trying to think of things where if I built new, I wish I had this, so I'm mentioning it to you now in case.
Hey, and I want to put in plumbing for a robot mop vacuum, like a wet robot mop. We're going to definitely build in the plumbing.
And maybe a little doghouse for your...
cat?
No, for the Clean Energy Show cat has its own house, a little detached heated bungalow. I was thinking like your robot lawnmower, because you're not there all the time.
Yeah. We would probably try and work out some kind of a robot lawnmower.
They'd probably have robot snowblowers one day. Be prepared for that. And of course, a podcast studio. You have to have your own podcast studio, because you'll be spending more time out there.
All right. Well, you can contact us many different ways by email, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And you can leave us a voicemail. That's speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. And of course, you could join our online community on Patreon. And there's free public posts, but you can also join to get access to other stuff that's not available everywhere.
That's right. Join our Patreon today as a paying member and get exciting perks like our monthly bonus episode for all Clean Club members. This month, you can go for a 30-minute ride with Brian and I in his Tesla Model Y without Brian driving, which, by the way, is the only way I would get into a car with you is if you didn't drive, because I know how you drive. All tiers have ad-free episodes with higher audio quality and exclusive access to the Clean Energy Show Discord server. discounts at our merch store, exclusive days early access to our content, behind-the-scenes material, and private updates, and all in one centralized place, which I'm loving, away from the chaos of social media, which is nice, especially these days. And you also get thank you credits on our video podcast and shout-outs on our audio podcast, which I'm about to do now. This week, we're thanking our Patreon member, like Timo, that we heard from earlier, Kellenberger, whom we just heard from, and Sean Hines and Bob Armstrong and Green Bastard, who are all members of the Clean Club and get shout-outs on our audio podcast from time to time, and thank you credits in all of our long-form videos. And thanks to all of our supporter-level members as well. You guys are making a big difference in our clean energy programming. Thanks for supporting climate-positive content. You can also support the podcast, if you'd like, by getting a Clean Energy Store product, a t-shirt or something, and we'll make a few bucks off that when you order those. That link is in your show notes as well as the Patreon page. And and Brian, here's a clip of Google's Notebooks AI podcast deep dive looking at our Patreon page for the Clean Energy Show. I thought that was funny.
We're talking Patreon page deep dive.
Nice.
Yeah. And specifically for this show called the Clean Energy Show.
I've heard of them. They're doing some really interesting stuff.
Yeah. And their Patreon, it's like this treasure trove of like bonus content and insider info.
That makes sense. A lot of podcasts are using Patreon these days. It's a smart way to connect with your most dedicated listeners.
Right. Give them that like exclusive experience.
Totally. Especially with clean energy. It's such a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
People are really eager for those like insider perspectives.
Yeah. And keeping up with all the new developments.
Exactly.
And the Clean Energy Show, they're not shying away from anything.
No, yeah.
They're all over the place with their episodes. Like they have solar tech policy debates.
Uh-huh.
But the one that like totally grabbed my attention, their deep dive on Tesla's RoboTaxis.
Oh, wow.
And like they didn't just talk about it. They took their Patreon subscribers on an actual test drive.
No way.
Yeah, using Tesla's full self-driving beta.
Oh, man, that's wild. That must have been a trip for those subscribers.
I know, right?
Talk about immersive content.
I can't even imagine.
What an endorsement. And then they went on to realize they're not human and had an existential crisis. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to believe, but yeah, those are not real people. Those are
But they could
AI
be, Brian.
beetles.
They could be. They could have the same
gotta
reaction to our lovely Patreon.
They're like my new favorite podcast. It's amazing. Okay, so moving along, Mexico's new president is looking to go big on electric vehicles. So we did mention this when it happened. They have a new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, and the president is looking at creating more of an EV industry in Mexico. So there's been cheap EVs coming in from China. They haven't been shut out like they have been here in Canada and the US. And, you know, these are inexpensive Chinese EVs, which are pretty decent. But the new president of Mexico wants to develop a whole supply chain and industry for EVs so that everything can be done in the country, as much of it as possible. And so, you know, they're looking to make their own EVs in China. So there's a prototype called an Olinia, and it's not clear who the companies are that are going to make these things, but the president said that they're trying to get everybody to kind of work together. And as we know, it isn't just one of the great advantages China has is the entire supply chain. So that's a part of what this initiative is about, is making sure that everything is available as much as possible in Mexico. And there can be a real serious, you know, inexpensive Mexican EV, hopefully in the future. Now, easier said than done. Now they actually have to execute that. You know, nevertheless, I think it's really interesting that the new president, obviously very clean energy focused.
Former climate scientists, retired climate scientists, very rare. So it's going to take a few years, but, you know, look out GM and Ford, because, you know, the Mexican-made EV or car of any sort can come into our market without punishing tariffs because of the free trade agreement, the North American free trade agreement.
Yeah, so BYD, they're already selling the Dolphin Mini in Mexico. This is for around $20,000 US, which is a very reasonable price. They're going to sell about 50,000 of those this year in Mexico, and then hoping to do 100,000 next year. So the Chinese car makers are already there. So, you know, they have their work cut out for them, but it's a different strategy than than Canada and the US, which is just, putting in tariffs and keeping out the Chinese competition.
Now, this isn't the only place that this is happening. This is happening in India and, other countries like Vietnam. So this is happening in a way because the cars are simpler and you can bring in the parts and the batteries, or you can start a battery plant. This is something that, oil doesn't see and the legacy automakers don't see. So look out. This is coming, and it's going to be a big deal, I think. It's going to take a few years, but it's going to be a big deal.
Yeah, way more moving parts in a gasoline car versus an EV at kind of a ridiculous level. So technically simpler, and yet still difficult to kind of ramp all this stuff up.
All right, we've arrived at the pre-recorded segment for a RoboTaxi future as imagined by me. Now, why do we talk about this stuff? It's because it is important for the climate to decarbonize transportation. And we see, and many futurists and analysts have seen, that if cars could drive themselves, that they would become cheaper because you don't need a driver. They would be electric because the electric cars last, 1.5 million miles now, I think, or kilometers, one of the two. But it's a lot longer than normal cars are expected to last, the batteries. And if you replace the seats from time to time and things that are worn out and buff them out from scratches and so forth, then they could, the economics of it are incredible. And if you have a really large RoboTaxi fleet and you are dominating the world, say there's a Microsoft and an Apple software out there, then you buy your own solar. You buy solar farms to power these fleets. And that becomes even cheaper then when you're powering them from your own energy. So the Tesla event happened. I don't know what you thought about it. A lot of analysts and even Tesla analysts were disappointed because there was no details. There wasn't a lot of details. They unveiled this futuristic two-seater. But, my criticism is this. Right now, it's a couple of passengers and Ubers. That's normal, right? But in a world where robotaxis do take over most of the miles traveled by people in North America, for example, that's going to be your soccer mom family, soccer dad family of 4 kids, all piling into a two-seater and taking 3 cars. No, we need to, if the world becomes a robotaxi world, then you're going to need larger vehicles. They did showcase a bus that held 20 people. A lot of people think they're never going to make that, though. Another thing is it doesn't have a port on it, Brian. You can't charge it with a plug. It only charges wirelessly. Now, wireless charging has been around for a long time. It adds weight to the vehicle, and there is a loss in efficiency, which has improved a lot with technology over the last 20 years. So it might be really worthwhile in some situations because you wouldn't need a robot. But I'm thinking, 10 years from now, because they had humanoid robots there already, 10 years from now, those humanoid robots surely would be able to plug in a car, and then you wouldn't have the energy loss of all those miles driven. You wouldn't lose 10% or something of that electricity through heat loss, wireless charging. Or it wouldn't have to be humanoid. It could just be an arm, which is what they've teased for years. And I think that might be a better situation. And here's why. Because if you have tens of thousands of cars and it's not rush hour, maybe it's the afternoon on a sunny day, maybe the grid pays you to store power and feed it back into the grid when those cars aren't being used and there's lots of extra electricity. And then you make money off of that. And then the future grid is more flexible like that. So, the Tesla event and our Patreon bonus episode where you and I went driving got me to thinking about what this might be like in the future. The video for the segment, as I've said, is available on our Patreon page right now. So go there and watch it and skip this segment if you want because the visuals are good, or rewatch it with the visuals. It will show up on all of our media channels eventually by the end of the week. So do that. It's now available to watch. The link is in your show notes and you can follow along or watch it later because I did use AI to imagine some things. The world is most certainly going to become a robotaxi world one day. The question is when, not if. So why is that important for the environment? Well, if the AI software in robotaxis was at a point now where it could spread quickly across the world, fossil fuels would quickly be displaced for road transportation. The reason is because electrified transportation is much cheaper than combustion. A fleet of tens of thousands or even millions of robotaxis would not be able to compete with electric if you ran combustion vehicles. Your competition is electric, you have to be electric too. If it takes another decade to get to that point, electric vehicles will still increase in market share during that time, but the sooner transportation as a service becomes a thing, the better. Transportation as a service is estimated to cost 90% less than car ownership. Therefore, car ownership will greatly decrease. Car payments, repairs, cleaning, tires, insurance, all that costs a lot of money. And if you put that all into a subscription service, like a Spotify for cars, it'll be a lot cheaper and a lot more preferable, especially for young people and older people. But it won't be like getting an Uber. It'll be faster, I think. Here's why. Without drivers, RoboTaxis could over-deploy and be sitting on standby, not doing anything down your street. Unused RoboTaxis won't cost much more than the cost of standby electricity for sitting there. So having enough to meet peak demand will make perfect sense. Or they could be sitting in an unused school parking lot just down the street from you. Same for grocery store parking lots or shopping mall parking lots that'll be underutilized in a RoboTaxi world. In the dead of winter, you'd likely be able to have that car show up at your front door before you could even get there yourself. By the time you ordered it, it'll only take a minute to get there. And if it's already starting to warm up, the interior will be a lot more pleasant via speedy electric heating. Of course, you'll be able to work on your way to work, watch a movie on your commute, or watch the Clean Energy Show YouTube channel, which will be run by robots in about 5 years, of course. I've got a poor relative who is always looking for a ride to get out of the house. You know, she might even travel for free. Local shopping malls and restaurants could and probably will offer coupons for free rides to their establishment, and maybe even throw in an ice cream cone. Because it'll be so cheap for them to offer that, it'll be the same as offering a discount on a hamburger. Churches might even buy a group subscription that only works on Sunday mornings, and it'll cost next to nothing for the church to do that and get their parishioners to the pews. When a RoboTaxi drives you home from work, the screen might entice you to stop at a restaurant to get a discount on something that you've ordered previously. Governments may be able to offer the poor free rides with coupon codes free to taxpayers as a condition of regulatory approval for RoboTaxi companies. The average American pays $14,000 per year for about 12,000 miles of car ownership. At first, a subscription might cost, $200 a month, but that would get down to as little as $20 a month once everything got going, maybe with limited miles. That's $10,000 per year put towards vacations and other things in your life to make your life better. Aside from not having the fun of driving, you'll be more productive and the convenience will outweigh car ownership, and I think most people will go for that. If it were to get that cheap, say, in 20 years, what would happen to public transportation? I'm not sure myself. I'm actually kind of questioning that. Regulations might need to be put in place to encourage the use of trains, buses, and subways instead of individual cars. However, I think buses as we know it might not survive this transition. Train and subway stations could be made to integrate electric robotaxis right inside their buildings for climate-protected pickups and drop-offs. In fact, apartment buildings and shopping malls could both integrate interior use of robotaxi pickup and drop-off. With no emissions, why not? Maybe if you're elderly, the car could drive you right to the store inside the mall. When my mother got older, she only drove when absolutely necessary and when the weather was perfect. This affected her quality of life. In the future, the elderly would get out more and do so safely. In small towns where it's not economical to have a taxi service, a robotaxi that sits most of the time will be viable without a human driver. The elderly will more easily and more often get out of their homes and go to the store, the bank, or the beauty parlor, which will be run by robots, I assume. Musk and others have predicted that robotaxis will be 10 times safer than human drivers. But why not 100 times or 1,000 times better than the best human drivers? Technology will keep advancing to keep passengers safe. At some point, the cars will speak to each other wirelessly. I think we can do better than 10 times safer. Why will robotaxis be cheap? Well, there's no human to pay, obviously. Vehicles will be electric and will last up to 1.5 billion kilometers according to current battery manufacturer statements. That'll probably get better as time goes on. There's less maintenance for EVs, so that makes them cheaper. And if you say you have a fleet of tens of thousands of EVs at a city, you will power them by building your own source of energy, which will be cheap, abundant solar. Parked cars plugged in will power the grid and earn money from that service during peak times when they are not driving. This is why Tesla's wireless charging plans may not make universal sense unless, of course, wireless can be done two ways. I'm not sure about that right now. Parking spaces will be freed up, and that'll free up like almost a third of the landmass of many cities, offering us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reshape the urban landscape. Los Angeles, for example, has enough vacant parking space to fit 3 cities the size of San Francisco. With the right policy, they could give way to green parks instead of parking lots, walkable streets, communal spaces, but especially more affordable housing that is centrally located. Autonomous transportation is coming, the only question is when. Waymo is already offering a paid service and driverless vehicles in multiple cities, but on a fairly limited basis. Surely in 10 years, the technology will be improved enough for mass expansion by whomever wins the AI driving race. Well, Brian, what has to happen? We have to solve self-driving. It's not solved completely. Waymos do exist. If you think all of this is nonsense, go watch a YouTube video of a customer getting into a Waymo and traveling across. Because every time I show somebody that, it blows their minds. They have no idea. They also say, I would never do that. But it is there. Yes, that has to be solved. It has to spread from city to city. Waymo maps things down to the millimeter pretty much, and Tesla is relying only on vision. If you also don't believe it, I mean, it's pretty remarkable, actually, that you and I drove for 30 minutes without any intervention. But you're there, so it's not as dramatic as getting into a car with nobody there. But you're there with your hands just about to touch the wheel and take over, and your foot is, ready to go on the brake. But you did not take over. And some, odd things were thrown at us, like a pedestrian running out in the middle of the street.
Yeah, no, it ended better than that Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
Fortunately. But yeah, so we live in a small city in the middle of Canada, and we've talked about this before. This is going to affect different cities different ways. Every city is different. For us, as we said recently, we have no passenger train service here at all for our city. We have very limited passenger bus service between cities.
Hardly worth mentioning. It's just basically 2 major cities, and that's it.
That's right. And then within the city, we do have city bus service, but they typically only come every 40 minutes, so it's not the best. We have some of those larger accordion buses, which is, it's like they're full in the morning, like, 8 a.m. they're full, and then 5 p.m. they're full. And then the rest of the day, they drive around these massive accordion buses, basically empty.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. So for our city, like those 2 products, like the Tesla RoboTaxi that they announced, and then the bigger sort of passenger van, like for a place like where we live, like that would solve like 99% of the transportation things. But in larger cities that have subways, guess what? You're going to still keep using the subway, I think, for most of your rides, which would be a good thing because too many of these robotaxis on the road, and we'd end up with an even worse traffic congestion than we have now. So it's going to affect every place differently, but a robotaxi future is a cleaner future.
Yeah, that's why I worried about it, because I imagined myself when I lived in Toronto for a year, I was fairly centrally located, but I was, a subway ride from downtown. And I'm thinking, I don't like the subway. This is before COVID. People sneezed a lot and you're packed in like sardines. Maybe I would just take a robotaxi all the way downtown and I wouldn't take the subway, and maybe everyone else would do that. So I think, like I mentioned in the video, I think government regulation and policy is going to have to make it so that people don't just use robotaxis, or the roads will be clogged with individual commuters. So you'll have to step in and regulate that.
Yeah, the thing I liked about living in Toronto is just that you had lots of options for transportation. Like I owned a car for a while when I lived in Toronto, but then you wouldn't always take the car because where you're going is difficult to park. So even though you own a car, you might still take the subway. I would ride my bike many times, and the bike lanes have improved a lot in Toronto since I lived there. So biking in Toronto has gotten really good. There's streetcars as well. I love streetcars because, it's not going into the dank bowels of the earth. You stay on the surface and it's just a little more airy and a little more
face and
the sun shines. And it's on rails, so it's a smooth ride. Anytime you get on a bus, of course, it's often going to be bumpy and crazy. But, big cities will have lots of transportation options, including, robotaxis eventually.
Yeah, and people pay a lot of money for parking in big cities. And that's one more thing that I didn't even mention is parking. that can be, a significant chunk of money.
All right, so moving on, Nevada, right? It's Nevada, not Nevada.
You say Nevada, I say Nevada.
Okay. Nevada is getting the world's first lithium sulfur battery gigafactory. So every week there's massive announcements. This is a $1 billion lithium sulfur battery factory in Reno, Nevada. It's going to eventually produce up to 10 gigawatt hours of batteries. Starting in 2027 is when the first batteries are expected to come online. They're going to do the cathodes and the anodes. So lithium sulfur batteries, they have some advantages, like they are lighter. They're 40% lighter than lithium ion batteries. And you don't have to worry about nickel, which is expensive and often imported, cobalt or graphite. But according to Electrek, there's still challenges to address, like a shorter lifespan for these batteries and perhaps less stability than lithium ion batteries. So it's a little surprising they're building a $1 billion factory with maybe not all the kinks worked out in the lithium sulfur technology, but still it's yet another kind of green factory announcement. One of, these happen all the time. We don't always mention them because there's just so many of them.
That's right. And we'll see how it does. The energy density is lower. There's still some things to be worked out, but it's exciting news. And coming up next, it's the lightning round. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
5 million deaths per year. That's caused by air pollution just in the global south, caused mostly by burning oil, coal, and gas. 5 million people killed by that fossil fuel pollution every year in the global south. And that's got to stop. And the thing is, we know from the show that it can stop. There are solutions. A new U.S. study estimates the total climate pollution from natural gas was 33% greater than from coal over a 20-year period.
Yeah, this is
climate pollution.
Liquefied natural gas, which is often made and transported, and it's been seen as a sort of a bridge or a replacement for coal, but it's because it's not so simple to produce and ship. It turns out that the emissions are in fact greater than coal, which is very unfortunate.
Which brings us to a CES Fast Fact. This is your regular reminder that close to half of all shipping traffic in the world is just moving fossil fuels around. I have to keep mentioning that.
Yeah.
Because it's so incredible, and we have new listeners to the show all the time, of course, so important to remember that.
Trucks have to bring the gas to the gas stations in Florida that don't have any.
Global EV sales are up 20% in August 2024, year over year. Just about 9% of the U.S. market now are EVs. That's an increase of about 8% over the same quarter last year. Get this, Brian, FEMA officials forced to halt Hurricane Helene operations due to threats and militias forming because of false information from Republican politicians and news organizations and clickbaity places egging that on. Rooftop solar supplies more than 50% of Australia's main grid's power for the first time. This was a period of time on Saturday in the middle of the day when the sun was shining and there was, businesses closed and factories closed, when the output of solar PV mounted just on rooftops of millions of Australia's homes reached 50.4% of the country's electricity generation. It's just incredible. And
amazing.
People say solar, you gotta, there's so much going on. The newest mid-size crossover in Stellantis' European lineup is available in a 5 or 7 passenger configuration with this is the two options, a mild hybrid combustion engine or a battery electric vehicle, all battery electric. And guess what? The price is the same. We've reached price parity on that.
Yeah. I suspect that's partly due to, EV quotas and clean air quotas forcing it in the direction of price parity. They're maybe losing a little bit of money on those EV versions, but price parity is here for gas versus EVs. That's amazing.
Friend of the show, Joe Biden, announced $612 million for new grid projects to support communities impacted by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. What are they going to do? They're going to put the power lines underground so they don't blow over. Good idea. Expensive and not easy all the time, but good idea. In 2023, the city of Edmonton in Canada invested in service for buses, adding 120,000 service hours to the transit network. And what happened? Ridership is up 12% compared to pre-pandemic levels. So, yeah, this is what maybe they would have to do here, and they can't. But if they were driverless and there was various sizes of things, interesting idea.
Edmonton's a bigger city, and it's always easier to make public transit work the more people you have. So I guess, if you build it, they will come.
So buses can last up to 18 years, public transit buses, and we are planning for all electric buses. And I wonder what that means in a RoboTaxi world. Hurricane Milton might have made landfall as a weaker Category 2 storm instead of a Category 3 if climate change hadn't intensified it. A rapid analysis by scientists has found. The head of Toyota says the shift to EVs will lead to job losses among those working on combustion engines, Reuters reports. Well, duh.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought?
Duh. Yeah.
Nearly 70 countries, making up 80% of the global renewables market, are set to surpass their national renewable ambitions for 2030. They're not going to fall short. They're going to surpass them very soon. That's like 70 countries are doing that, not just China, but 70 countries. And finally this week, electric vehicle battery prices are expected to fall almost 50% by 2026. This is from Goldman Sachs. They've done a study on this, and average global prices for electric vehicle batteries are expected to fall by 50% by 2026 due to combinations of technical innovation, which we see all the time from China, and a downturn in battery metal prices. There was a shortage out of the pandemic, and that has taken care of itself. Now there's an oversupply. This price drop could make electric vehicle ownership's cost equivalent to petrol cars in the United States. As a result, experts predict that demand for electric vehicles will significantly rise starting in 2026. The decline in metal prices, including lithium and cobalt, is a significant factor contributing to the falling battery prices. Nearly 60% of the cost of EV batteries comes from these metals, and they are falling. So price parity without government incentives is coming for all vehicles in all vehicle segments.
Yeah, so the price of batteries is always dropping, but a further 50% drop by 2026, that is potentially a very, very big deal. And if Goldman Sachs is correct, that's going to happen. All right, and that's the show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Around social media, Clean Energy Pod, and please join our Patreon for free to get special updates about the show. The link is in the show notes. And you can also support the show with a purchase from the Clean Energy merch store, again, listed in your show notes or on our website or on the Patreon page.
Become a paid member of our Patreon or YouTube channel to get exciting perks like our monthly bonus episode, ad-free episodes, and much, much more. The video version of our podcast is released the weekend following the audio version. It is on TikTok. It is on Instagram, although they will be shorter versions because they have to be restricted to an hour. Sometimes we go over an hour. Yeah, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify if you don't mind, if you'd like to help us out. And welcome to all the new listeners to the show. Please remember to subscribe on your podcast app because we do this every week, and we'll be doing it again next week, come hell or high water. See you next week.
See you next week.